worst to best books that I read in 2024. This will be a rapid fire list, just 2 to 4 sentences for most books, because otherwise my head's gonna explode. With that, let's start at the bottom. These are the bad books, ones that I did not find enjoyable and plainly would not recommend. Alright, up first is a book that I don't have right now because I sold it back to my local half-price books. That is Goodbye Vitamin by Rachel Kong. A woman goes to live with her Alzheimer's-stricken father for a year. Instead of following up on this interesting plot thread, though, we get random, disconnected life events that serve little or no significance. It tries very hard to be quirky, and frankly, it just gives me the ick. Z tier, do not read this book. Second worst of the year, Graveyard Shift by M.L. Rio. The author tries to make 5 main characters in 108 pages work. It does not. I tried to care about this, and I could not engage with it as a mystery or as a character study because it fails as both. Not to mention the horrible Disney Channel-esque dialogue. Now I'm going to talk about a series that I also don't have anymore because I sold it back to my half-price books. That is The Program by Suzanne Young, the first 4 books anyway. And the main premise here is that a teen suicide epidemic suddenly emerges, and with the evil YA dystopia government being evil, their solution is to create a brain-wiping program that prevents the suicides but leaves its patients as shells of themselves. It's a good concept, it really is, but the execution is quite sloppy. It is full of the typical YA pitfalls, including forced love triangles and a white bread, faceless main character, Sloane. And that's the real tragedy there, Sloane. Because of all the places to have a faceless main character, why in the series, where I'm supposed to care about her losing her identity, she's already a blank slate. I don't care if she becomes what she already is. Now, the prequels, The Remedy and the Epidemic is what they're called, books 3 and 4, those are much better than the first 2 in my opinion, but I don't care enough to rank them separately. And book 5, The Adjustment, I could not get through 20 pages. It does not need to exist. This whole series, in fact, probably could have been an email. At the very least, it's entertaining, and that's why I got through 4 books, but it doesn't really need to exist. I'm sorry. Orbital by Samantha Harvey. Wow, somehow this won the Booker Prize in 2024. If you like bland main characters and the only glimpses of good storylines being completely abandoned before they even start, this is for you. This really pisses me off. It was like a bad space-themed slam poetry night that just drags and drags for 200 pages. We are everything, yet nothing. We are everywhere, yet nowhere. I am a speck of dust, yet eternal. I really, really cannot stand this book. I'm sorry. Alright, don't kill me. Mockingjay by Suzanne Collins. This was a disappointing end to the trilogy. The action doesn't really kick in until part 3, and the rest is just spent moping around and being claustrophobic. I wanted more out of this, and I especially found the Peeta Gale love triangle resolution quite underwhelming. Sorry, Hunger Games fans. A Wild Winter Swan by Gregory Maguire. This is by the author of Wicked, and it is a retelling of the Hans Christian Andersen tale, The Wild Swans. This book is set in 1960s New York City. It's got those good 60s Christmas city vibes, but it could have easily been about half as long, and I never really connected with the main characters or the plot or anything at all, really, for that matter. it's just kind of a mess. The Only One Left by Riley Sager. This is a gothic murder mystery about a wealthy girl who allegedly kills her mom, dad, and sister at the age of 16 and is now wheelchair bound in the murder house 50 years later. This could have been great, and that synopsis sounds amazing. Unfortunately, this ran really dry in its build-up, and there were way too many twists at the end. The barefaced shock value moves took me out of it. Survive the Night by Riley Sager. This is a slightly better Riley Sager book. It is mostly engaging and even entertaining, but it completely falls apart in the epilogue. I know, maybe that's a ridiculous reason to have this book so low, but it's a revisionist ending for no reason, and it feels like a slap in the face for actually caring about the story. And I don't like that. Okay, we are moving out of the trenches. That was all of the completely bad books. Here comes the ho-hum decent books. These ones did not offend, but they left very little impression on me. Maybe you'd enjoy them more than I did. And this will probably be the most boring section of the video, so I wanted to at least give it a fun title. Afterlife by Julia Alvarez. An aging Dominican woman deals with the death of her husband and the subsequent disappearance of her older sister, which brings her and her two other sisters together to find the missing one. It does okay at dealing with themes of love and loss, and it brings some of the characters to life, and it also does okay at providing fish out of water social commentary, since the main character is a Dominican woman living in suburban Vermont. I wish I had more to say, but it kind of just felt dry to me. Also, it does a pet peeve of mine. There are no quotation marks in here, and I hate that. The Sentence by Louise Erdrich. Louise Erdrich. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. Minneapolis, 2020. An indigenous-run bookstore is being haunted by the ghost of its most annoying customer, an old woman named Flora. This book acts partly as a play-by-play of actual world events, which was unique, but made for sort of a shapeless narrative. The characters are quite loving and charmable, but something didn't click about this book for me. Speaking of bookstores, Days at the Murasaki Bookshop by Satoshi Yagisawa is up next. This is about a Tokyo career woman who seeks a new path in her life, so she quits her lofty corporate job to work at her uncle's bookshop in the Jimbocho district. It's a decent slice of life story. It's got cozy vibes, but it just didn't do that much for me. Happy All the Time by Laurie Colwin. I applaud this book for being down to earth while also being a rom-com, but it felt like one of the fluffiest things I read all year. And that's not always a bad thing. It just wasn't for me. If Only I Had Told Her by Laura Nolan. This is the sequel / retelling to Nolan's other book, If He Had Been With Me, which I read in 2023 and I really enjoyed. The perspectives here offer some varied takes on grief. It's maybe just a bit long for its own good, as it often felt dry in ways that its predecessor did not. The Idiot by Elif Batuman. A chronically bored Harvard student searches for purpose in a life that has granted her intelligence but not direction. It's got good dry humor, but there were times when I felt chronically bored myself reading it, although I suppose that's the point. Catching Fire by Suzanne Collins. I mean, I like the Hunger Games world, but this felt redundant. It was a lot of rehashing of the first book, and the pacing in the movie version of this is honestly a lot better. Family Meal by Brian Washington. I think I appreciate what this was trying to do more than what it actually did. This is the story of a gay man being haunted by the ghost of his recently dead partner, whose loss he goes on frequent drug-induced sex trips to cope with. On paper, great, but in practice, it strays a little far from what the blurb promises, and not in a good way to me. Foe by Ian Reid. This one had me hooked in the beginning, very hooked, But then by the end, I felt like it somehow could have been bolder in its payoff. I think it needed to measure up to the beginning a little more. Maybe it's just the really high standard I have for this author though, which more on that later. And now it's time for the good books. These were not among my very favorites of the year, but they're still entirely recommendable. Up first we have The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime by Mark Haddon. This is a Bildungsroman classic by now, and I can see why. It has a very readable, unique style that gives everything its own flavor. I love Christopher as a narrator, even if he might not be the most accurate depiction of an autistic person. Open Water by Caleb Azuma Nelson. A romance story about two black British artists that explores what it means to be seen and loved and sometimes scorned for who you are. The second person POV narration, it threw me off at times, but it's still a good love story and a good character study. YN by Esther Yee. This is one of the weirdest books I have ever read in my life. It's about a woman who slowly gets engrossed in K-pop fandom culture and begins idolizing a singer named Moon. Crazy, dreamlike antics ensue, and it's the most bizarre yet somehow fitting commentary on parasocial relationships I could possibly imagine. Maybe controversial, Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. This is the story of a struggling author who makes it big after wrongfully publishing her dead Asian author friend's manuscript as her own. I wanted to love it more, and I did like it for its readability and its themes about plagiarism and racism in the publishing industry, but it felt like there were two different climaxes that the author couldn't choose between, and so she just said, "What the hell?" and put both into the story. And this made the last 100 or so pages feel quite disjointed, and frankly the second of the two big climaxes felt ridiculous to me, and it didn't match the rest of the book's tone. But other than that, I did enjoy it, and I think it has a lot of great things to say. In Memoriam by Alice Wynne, a gay World War I love story that can be equally sweet and devastating. The two love interests are both strong characters with a bond that makes sense. I don't think I fell head over heels in love with this book as much as Goodreads did, but I do understand the appeal. The White Tiger by Aravind Adiga. This is the story of an Indian entrepreneur clawing his way from the depths to the top. This is a great evolutionary story for the main character Balaram, as we constantly see his aspirations clash with his morals until he starts to make drastic choices that cannot be undone. This book emphasizes the kind of person that it takes to move upward and take charge in such a rigid corporate world hierarchy. Also, the movie version is on Netflix, and it's a lovely adaptation. Mercy Street by Jennifer High. A story told from four perspectives, ranging from the left to the alt-right, about a abortion clinic in Boston. I like that this book personifies all of its characters, even the ones that I personally disagree with, honestly, and without turning anyone into a caricature of their beliefs. This is good social commentary, good wintertime reading. Before the Coffee Gets Cold by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. 4 interconnected short stories told from a basement cafe in Tokyo, all to do with the same time travel gimmick. That is that you can travel back in time and talk to someone from your life, but you must finish your conversation before your coffee gets cold. It's a charming little collection with some emotional moments. I cried during the second story, Husband and Wife, so bonus points there for the author. This works quite well as a palate cleanser between denser books. And speaking of dense, This Is How You Lose the Time War by Amal El-Mohtar and Max Gladstone. It's a sapphic love story between two soldiers on opposing sides of an ongoing time war. The prose is very abstract, which sometimes is quite beautiful, but other times made me want to tear my hair out in frustration trying to grasp onto any scraps of a cohesive storyline. Mostly, though, I did enjoy it, and the poetic language won me over in the end. What does it for me? I think this is a great representation of romance in its most abstract form. Sometimes you have feelings for someone, some very deep feelings, and it's hard to put those feelings into words. The Tatami Time Machine Blues by Tomihiko Morimi. This is a sequel to Morimi's other book, The Tatami Galaxy. A bunch of college kids in Kyoto find their lives suddenly interrupted by the arrival of a mysterious time-traveling device in their dorm hall. It's got Morimi's signature silly and endearing yet philosophical writing style, so I'm a fan. The Girl in Question by Tess Sharp. This is a sequel to Sharp's other book, The Girls I've Been. Nora and company venture into the California woods on a backpacking trip, but are soon met with danger from a familiar face. This closes out the main character's arcs well. It moves fast, and it balances its action well with its humor and with its character backstories. My one gripe is that I had to suspend my disbelief a bit at how easily these 3 high school age kids were able to just blow through henchmen and these trained officials. Still though, like, you set that aside and it's great. It's great. Compound Fracture by Andrew Joseph White. These kids resort to plotting murder a little bit faster than what seems realistic to me, but I still love the theme of trans people having been erased from history and trying to find that elusive connection between now and then. As an action story, it moves quickly, and as a revenge story, it's quite satisfying. Passing by Nella Larson. Harlem, 1929, a black woman meets a childhood friend by chance who has chosen to pass as white in their time apart. This is a powerful story about how race passing can make life easier in some ways, but in other ways impossibly difficult. This is worth the read, just for showcasing such a rare literary voice in the form of its author, a black woman writer who actually experienced the Harlem Renaissance in the 1920s. Beloved by Toni Morrison. This is possibly Morrison's most famous work, and it's a post-slavery story of a mother and child who are haunted by the ghost of the mother's infant child. The writing style is quite challenging, and that did put me off of reading this for a bit, but with the audiobook narration, I was able to comprehend and appreciate it well. It's not my personal favorite by Morrison, but the way it depicts slavery and its lingering effects is haunting and beautiful. Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata. Kiko, the main character, is a long-time convenience store employee who finds her life purpose in serving her duty at work. I relate to her a lot, finding great comfort in clear-cut, rigid systems, and also I ache for her when she starts to feel ostracized for living her life in a way that's harmless to others but somehow offends them. This book is, I guess, in short, neurodivergent catharsis. The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins. This is the Hunger Games prequel, of course, from young Coriolanus Snow's POV. This book felt a lot richer than the main trilogy did in terms of world building, and I find that quite satisfying. In general, it reads more like an adult book than its predecessors. For me, it would have probably beat out the original Hunger Games novel in terms of quality had it not been for the fairly monotonous third act here. But aside from that, this is a really good villain origin story. And also Lucy Gray is great, of course. Speak of the devil, yes, The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins. This, by a slim margin, is my favorite Hunger Games book, the original. This is the source material that was good enough to spawn a million awful copycat clones, and some really good ones, but that's beside the point, which in turn completely oversaturated the YA dystopia market. That's kind of a legendary feat in itself. In terms of story, this is the simplest and strongest that the series ever gets, for me. 24 tributes enter, one will leave, let the child murder begin. The one thing I will never forgive Suzanne Collins for, though, is popularizing the sweetheart blonde versus the bad boy brunette love triangle trope. I imagine she feels like Oppenheimer after inventing the A-bomb. Look what you did. Look what you did to the genre. Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn. Amy Dunn has disappeared, and all signs point to her husband, Nick, being the perpetrator. But is it really that simple? This is a thrilling case of unreliable narration that drives the central mystery forth in exciting and unexpected ways. It's well worth its popularity, I would say. The Girls I've Been by Tess Sharp. The main character, Nora, is no stranger to changing her identity at the drop of a hat, being the daughter of a con artist mother. When Nora, her girlfriend Iris, and her ex-boyfriend Wes are caught in a hostage, gunpoint bank situation together, they must use all the tricks in their tool belt to escape and ensure everyone else's safety. Like its sequel, which I just talked about, The Girl in Question, this is a wonderful balance of character moments and action scenes, and definitely a page-turner. Evidently, it's supposed to be coming to Netflix as a series starring Millie Bobby Brown, but, that's been in development hell, so we'll see about that. Earthlings by Sayaka Murata. This is a cautionary tale about shunning weird children instead of showing them love and understanding. All at once, I sort of found myself sympathizing with the main character, Natsuki, and also watching in horror as her actions became more and more monstrous when she progressed into adulthood. It's a lot, but it's recommendable to those with a strong stomach and a hunger for some neurodivergent horror fiction. Alright, last up in this category, it's If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio, a dark academia murder mystery in which 6 Shakespeare students reel from the sudden and violent loss of their classmate, and they try to piece together who could have caused such a death. This book has a lot of heart for a murder mystery. It took me on an unexpected emotional journey and earned a post-completion walk around my neighborhood because I had a lot to decompress. I rooted for the characters' successes, but then I began to question who the real heroes and villains were in the story. I also thought, when do the characters end and their assigned roles begin? And that brings us to the next category, great books. These books get a gold star for being awesome. First up, James by Percival Everett, the Huckleberry Finn retelling that's been getting a lot of rave recently, and for good reason. Reading this story, this classic story, from Jim's perspective adds more insight than I thought a retelling could necessarily offer. I especially loved the themes about the power of language and speech, and how no state was truly a free state before the Civil War. Small Things Like These by Clarke. My dad and I love the Christmas song Good King Wenceslas because it actually tells a story of somebody doing a good deed at Christmas, as opposed to just promoting the idea of doing good deeds at the holidays. And I love Small Things Like These for the very same reason. Not only does it offer a window into a harrowing chapter of Irish history, the Magdalen laundries, but it also considers the value of doing good deeds for strangers and welcoming them as your family, especially if you've faced hardships of your own. Bloom by Delilah S. Dawson, the perfect marriage of sweet sapphic romance and A24 style body horror. This is a beautifully written allegory for how even the most poisonous and toxic relationships can taste irresistibly sweet sometimes. It made me, on several occasions, want to vomit violently, but that's why I love it so much. It hits you in the gut, in the climax. The Night is Short, Walk On Girl by Tomihiko Morimi. 4 short stories told across 4 seasons, following an adventurous girl and her pining boy failure of an admirer. The characters' voices are distinct enough that Morimi's choice to leave the perspective swaps here unlabeled is justified, because there's no need. This is a charming and delightful book about yearning and being a free spirit and falling in love as 2 young people. Also, a heavy recommendation on the movie version. It is one of the finest animated films I have seen in a while, and I love a good animated film. I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jennette McCurdy. The iCarly star offers a look into her life as a former child actress. She very openly discusses things like eating disorders, bad power dynamics on set, and what growing up living someone else's dreams does to your psyche and your physical well-being. Spoiler, not great things. I think this book is not only very important for the industry, but also entertaining and funny and enthralling all on its own. And I really hope that Jennette McCurdy is doing much better right now. Word by Word, The Secret Life of Dictionaries by Corey Stamper. This book makes the history of dictionaries interesting. And for the record, I was always going to be fascinated by that subject, but on paper it just sounds like the driest possible subject matter, doesn't it? A little bit of backstory. I had a dictionary collecting phase in middle school, and my mom got me this book as a gift to encourage my odd little hobby. Thank you, Mom. Reading it in 2024 was the first time I'd read it since 2017, and it's still as witty and fun and informative as ever. I love the author, Corey Stamper, and her tales of working at Merriam-Webster as a lexicographer. I believe she's got some good stuff here on YouTube too. The Vanishing Half by Brit Bennett. This was the first book I read of the year, and it's a tale of 2 sisters from a rural Louisiana town called Mallard, which is full of lighter-skinned black people. And one of the sisters chooses to continue living just as herself, while the other chooses to pass as white. And if this sounds familiar, it's because Passing by Nella Larson was the inspiration for this book. Also, that was the last book I read of the year, so it was a fun full circle moment. Both books are unique and well worth a read for my money. The Perks of Being a Wallflower by Stephen Chbosky. In a sea of surface level, boring, or just downright inaccurate depictions of teenage mental illness in the media, this book stands out for nailing it. It deals with very heavy topics while keeping a fairly lighthearted tone. It's one of the best coming-of-age stories I've ever read, hands down. Although I still have yet to watch the movie, so if I should, let me know. Sula by Toni Morrison. If I had a nickel for every book I read this year about 2 estranged sisters/best friends who reunited after a long time in a way that emphasizes their differences, I would have 3 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened 3 times. This book deals with death in a very matter-of-fact, unembellished way, which is refreshing to see in the lit fic genre. This was my introduction to Toni Morrison, and it won me over. I would recommend starting here if you want to get into this author. On Earth, We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong. A Vietnamese-American immigrant writes letters to his illiterate mother, and that's as heart-wrenching as it sounds. The author's style is absolutely stunning. I have so many quotes that I paused to highlight. Goodreads is valid for loving this one. I believe it's a semi-autobiographical picture of the author's life, too. Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell by Susanna Clarke. I have said it before, but what a doorstop of a book. This is Susanna Clarke's debut novel set in the early 1800s about 2 rival English magicians who disagree on the nature of their obscure craft. The story really kicks into gear when one of the magicians, Mr. Norrell, makes a sort of deal with the devil to save the life of a a noblewoman in a publicity stunt. It's so long, but the way that it handles magic is refreshing for the fantasy genre. It feels very human, very realistic, and it doesn't ever break its own rules. And on top of that, this is just a damn good fantasy story. And now we go from that clunker to this little bitty, tiny little book. This is Foster by Clarke. And, in 92 pages, Clarke does it again. This is a stellar vignette about familial love and loss, and it carries as much weight as any full-length novel would. The last of the 3 Morrison books I read this year, The Bluest Eye. It's a brutally honest account of racism and its butterfly effects. This book shows how having bad things assumed of you through stereotypes can, in a way, enable that nasty behavior. The author's mastery of using beautiful language to describe ugly parts of humanity is present, even here in her debut novel, The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. A very timeless, very gay story about the pursuit of youth and its consequences. For a book written over 100 years ago, it's insanely readable. It could have been written today, I think. Gold star for you, Mr. Oscar Wilde. That book really is just equally important to literary history, but also queer history. I mean, it shows that books like that can exist in a world that does not value queer people. And in a way that's reassuring to see. The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. This is about as devastating as a semi-autobiographical novel can get. Esther Greenwood, the author's insert, her spiral into depression starts on steady ground that slowly begins to pull away as the pages fly by. At its core, this is a soul-crushingly honest character journey that reflects the tragic life of its author. Now we at last arrive at the final category, the cream of the crop, your winner! These are the very best books of my reading year in 2024. Up first, we have Homegoing by Yaa Gyasi, a 7-generation African family saga that poses the question, is it worse to be ashamed of your family's history or to not have a history to remember at all? This book shows how one generation's trauma can pass down to the next indefinitely through the lens of the slave trade in Ghana to present-day America. For a project so ambitious, the author manages to pull it off in just 300 tight, well-paced pages, and that is a feat in itself. Hell Followed With Us by Andrew Joseph White. This is some of my favorite cover art ever. That's why I was drawn to it, so kudos to the cover artist. In a post-apocalyptic society ravaged by a fundamentalist Christian cult, trans boy Benji is a ticking time bomb set to transform into a beast that will allegedly bring salvation to humanity. Transgender body horror is a perfect combination, and the idea of losing your body to transform into a giant monster against your will sounds all too familiar to some of us. As a whole, this book is a brilliant metaphor for the continued survival of the queer community against all odds, and it is simply addictive to read. Go do yourself a service, check out that author, Andrew Joseph White. He only puts out bangers. The Mysterious Benedict Society by Sir Trenton Lee Stewart, Esquire. 4 gifted kids are recruited for a secret mission after a mystifying series of tests puts them all under the care of a man named Mr. Benedict. This is middle grade literature done right. I said this in my last video, but it recognizes who its audience is, younger children, while also treating them with respect. And I admire that a lot. That was a middle school reread, and somehow it was even better the second time. Holden Caulfield, he's just like me, for real! This is The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger, and it's a modern-ish classic coming-of-age story about a rich prep school boy who skips town to dilly-dally around New York City for a while, and maybe find his life's purpose along the way. The author, Salinger, gives us one of the most distinct, funny narrative voices I've ever read, which only adds to the already rich emotional texture of everything. For the 1950s, and just in general, this is a really good depiction of mental illness in young boys, young men, whatever. I'm Thinking of Ending Things by Ian Reid. I dissociate sometimes, and this book is a lot like that. This is easily one of the scariest books I read last year, and the less you know going in, the better. Just be prepared for an anonymous sense of unease that slowly builds to a climax and then explodes. Also a great movie by Charlie Kaufman on Netflix. Detransition Baby by Tori Peters. Reese is a trans woman who, among other things, longs for motherhood, and when her ex-partner and former trans woman, Ames, suddenly impregnates his current lover, Katrina, an odd little family bond starts to form between the three adults. With the unborn baby in mind, Detransition Baby is a meditation on 3 different kinds of womanhood, and there are many, many individual complications. This is a must-read, okay, for my fellow trans femmes, and for allies too. You're not getting off that easy. Go read it. Detransition Baby by Tori Peters. And now we enter the top 3 already. I feel like I haven't even been talking for that long, but anyway, here's number 3. The bronze medal goes to The Spirit Bares Its Teeth by Andrew Joseph White. This is Victorian, transgender, young adult, dark fantasy, body horror goodness. So, trans boy Silas is sent to an institution for mad girls after he incidentally makes a very public display of himself while in an attempt to escape an arranged marriage. During his time in the institute, he discovers that there is a dark underbelly to the facility and hatches a high-risk, high-reward plan to bring it crashing down. It's another gut-wrenching, spectacular queer survival story from Andrew Joseph White, so y'all better read his stuff. And the silver medal, number 2, best book of the year last year, goes to The Bee Sting by Paul Murray. This is the multi-perspective story of an Irish family whose car garage business starts to decline during a recession, and the question that permeates all throughout the 650-ish pages is, where did this all start to go wrong? And by extension, how much worse can it get from here? The answer is a lot worse. This is the prime example of a book that I loved to death, but I will never be reading it again. The Bee Sting is so powerful and so frightening that it becomes an exercise in emotional labor. I really felt like the characters were right in front of me, and that was as harrowing as it was impressive on the author's part. It got me to feel things that I don't like feeling, emotions that I don't like feeling, and by the time I reached the climax, I literally had an anxiety attack in my bed at like 5 a.m. And this maybe sounds like a horrible sell for a book that I'm placing so high on my worst to best list, but I really do love it, and I think that these emotions are just a testament to how profoundly it affected me, and I think that's a sign of stupendous authorship. So my congrats to you, Mr. Paul Murray, for making such a terrifying climate crisis masterpiece. It's only fitting. And here we finally are. Number 1, best book out of the 65 that I read last year. Thankfully, a little bit more lighthearted. It is none other than Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. I don't even know where to begin. This book lured me in like a fishhook and never let go even after I finished. And I think knowing as little as possible before jumping in is best, because this book changed my life and I genuinely don't think that I can oversell it. But I'll give you this much. Piranesi, the lead character, is one of only 2 inhabitants in a mysterious place called the House. This place is infinitely many, high-ceilinged, connected, gigantic corridors laden with an army of different marble statues and an inexplicable ocean of water that runs beneath the floors. In the interest of exploration, Piranesi one day sets out to reach the opposite end of the house, and that's where the central mystery really begins. As each piece of the house's true nature reveals itself to Piranesi, it becomes more and more apparent that something shocking lies beneath its mesmerizing and enchanting surface. Seriously, if there is one thing you take from this video, it's to go buy a copy of Piranesi and read it immediately, because I suspect this is not only the best book that I read last year, but possibly the best book I have ever read, period. And I still don't think that I'm overselling it. I think this is something that you need to experience. So please give it a try if you're so inclined. I don't think you'll regret it. Leave a comment for me if you do. And that, my friends, is the end of my big list video. Thank you so very much for tuning in. My question of the day for you is, what was your favorite book that you read last year, or your least favorite, either one? And you can say why if you want. Leave it in the comments, and I'll give you one of those heart reactions, just like the real YouTubers. And with that, thanks again for tuning in, and I hope you all have a wonderful reading year. Bye.